Greetings, my name's Guy Dauncey. This is the show Change the World, where, as you'll know if you're a regular watcher, I like to invite guests on who share my passion for making this world a lot better place than it is today, and looking at so many ways we can improve it with vision, with possibility. And my guest today is Adam Olsen, I'm delighted to say. Adam is a member of the Tsartlip First Nation, where you were born and you lived for your entire life.
Same property, Guy.
Same property, there you go. Former Central Saanich councillor, and in May 2017 you ran for the Green Party and won a seat, becoming the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands.
Correct.
You and your wife Emily have 2 children, Silas and Ella. You routinely coach your son's community soccer team, and you've led community efforts to protect and improve the Salish Sea and the Saanich Inlet, right?
Step back a little bit from coaching.
Okay, I'm kind of busy.
I had to, coaching was something that unfortunately I didn't have time to do.
So now you're coaching NDP MLAs in the Grays of the Greens, right?
Well, you know, it's a fascinating experience. I couldn't have chosen a better time to be elected than in this 2017 election, and the current situation that we have in the legislature is one that I think that serves the people of British Columbia well. The tension between in a minority government is one that really serves people well, and you know, we've already started to see more flexibility than a majority government would have. You know, policy comes out, maybe not quite perfect, apply a little pressure, you know, move the tension, and
your confidence and supply agreement, the basis of the alliance you have, means they're consulting you on a whole whack of things, right?
That's right, and it also means that once something has been initiated, that there's more flexibility to have change. In the past, a majority government would take something, policy, imperfect as it may be, and just ram it through, and then we'd have to live with that. So now there's an opportunity to massage and change and adjust. So we're going to talk salmon, but before we get to salmon, I got to ask that. But when you were running, you had ideas in your mind of what it might be like to be an MLA. Mm-hmm. How does the practice, the reality, measure up to what you thought it might be like? This isn't the first time that I've been in public office.
Sure.
I've been in public life for now a decade. So. Yes. To me, I think the thing that really stands out is I came into that place with the ability and the knowledge, the background of making a decision.
Right.
And I think when I look around at my colleagues that may be in public life for the first time, making a decision is a tough thing to do. And whether you're doing it in caucus or you're doing it in the legislature, that decision point is particularly tense. So I've been in the limelight, I guess. I've been in the lights. I've had a social media account. My skin has been sufficiently thickened.
Yes.
It's the pace of that place that I think was perhaps the most shocking to me. It moves so quick. We've been in there. Wow. It felt like we were just reading the throne speech, and we're now, you know, weeks into the legislative session. Before we know it, it'll be over and we'll be in the summertime. So
salmon.
Yes.
I want to talk salmon.
Steaknook. That's the Sinchothan way of saying
before we get on to the ecology and biology, talk about salmon from a First Nations cultural perspective.
They're our relatives, our brothers and sisters. We coexisted together in the Salish Sea for countless generations. They provided for us and we provided for them. It was a symbiotic relationship. The Saanich fishing practice was with something called a squala, a reef net. It was a stable in a location. We didn't go out and chase the salmon around. We set our nets up in places that we knew they came. Yeah. And it was predictable because we understood them from a scientific perspective. Yes. We knew that they were going to be here. We knew that they were going to be here at a certain time.
And thousands of years of passed down experience.
That's right. And those locations were called our nchimit. That's our inheritance. Those locations, and it was an interaction and a relationship, a dance.
So a particular family might sort of, in quotes, own a particular location.
Families would own several locations, in fact, and they would own several nets side by side,
but they'd always be passed down. They'd never be sold.
They'd go a weight. There's this rock, and it would be passed down from from a fishing captain. I think they're called a quinolian. Yes. From one to another.
An actual rock?
Yeah. So the nets would be weighed down with giant rocks. Okay. And they would take a symbolic rock. Yes. With a rope tied through a hole in it. Yes. And that would be symbolizing that location.
Yes. So back in the 1890s, the sockeye runs on the Fraser were around 40 million return each year. 2 or 3 years ago, it was down to less than 1 million.
Yeah.
What does that do for the First Nations perspective, like, of what's going on here?
Well, I'm going to broaden it out if I might.
Please.
I think that what it does for British Columbians is it's devastating for all of us. I think that I have this perspective of the fish. I grew up fishing. My dad, my grandfather. And the story, whether I'm an Indigenous person or a non-Indigenous person, is very similar. If you lived on the coast of this province, indeed, if you lived in the interior of this province, salmon courses through your veins. It's just part of who we are.
Let me get it right. The sockeye, the pink, the chum, the coho, oh my goodness, and the
Chinook.
Chinook. All five. Do they have different cultural weight in your community, or are they just, some are preferred to others? It's taste?
No, they came at different times. I mean, if you take a look at the Saanich, there's 13 moons in the Saanich calendar.
Okay.
And 4 of them are named after salmon runs.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
So Chunhunnen, Chunquotlu, Chunthucky, Chuntheitwin.
Chun means the salmon.
Chun. Well, it's the moon, I believe.
The moon.
No, so it would be the humpback moon, the chum moon, the coho moon, and the sockeye moon. And basically, all other 9 moons of the calendar signified preparation, time to prepare for those 4 moons.
Wow.
The relationship and the salmon fishery was a law. And you followed the law, and you would be rewarded for it. If you broke that law, the relationship, we would find ourselves hungry and vulnerable. And when the Europeans first got here, they found a people that were very powerful, very, very sophisticated commercial traders, very, very sophisticated resource developers. And able to manage a sustainable fishery year over year over year.
Yeah.
Our holes were manufactured with, our nets were manufactured with holes in them, intentionally. And it was a symbol. What it said was we understood that a certain number of those fish needed to make it back to the creeks and streams.
Yeah.
The lineage of those fish, because we didn't fish in the same location every year, we moved around, and the lineage of the fish that came by those areas were viewed as sacred, similar to my lineage, similar to my lineage, right? A sacred lineage of my family. Those were families of fish, and so a completely different perspective than one we have now. And I think, frankly, as a legislator and as someone who's in BC politics, I think we can learn a lot from that. You know, if we start to return that relationship back to resource development, it's not one of being poor, and it's not one of not developing resources. It's one of developing resources in a responsible, sustainable way, looking at the long-term opportunities for that relationship.
Right. So if the average, say the sockeye run on the Fraser is probably one of the biggest runs in the whole province, because it must have a host of tiny runs within it with all the tributaries of the Fraser. We know that was 40 million returns each year back in the last 1890s or so. What is it going to take to restore it and protect it and get it back to even half of that level?
So in the early 2000s, I've been doing some research on this. In the early 2000s, when the BC Liberal government came in, there was a program called Fisheries Renewal Bc. Right. And it was a BC NDP initiative. And the Campbell government immediately started to dismantle it. They looked at it and they started to take it apart. And John Van Dongen was the minister at the time, and he's quoted in the media saying, basically, we've got a different perspective about this than the former NDP government. Our alliances are to aquaculture. Our alliances are to private industry, private enterprise is what he said. They were very clear. You know, the one thing about the Liberals, whether you agree with them or not, they were clear about their policy, their vision, and executing it.
But even around that time, the Newfoundland cod crisis had already happened, so they'd seen what happened if you don't manage the stocks properly.
Well, where I'm going with this is what they said was, we're not even going to try. We're not even going to try to dance with the federal government on this, because DFO's got a big hand to play in this. We're just going to go to aquaculture. We're just going to go to fish farming.
So give up on the wild stock, basically.
Yeah, sure. It's too much work, you know. And so they basically went. They laid out their vision and then they executed. It's one thing that the Liberals were very good at. Yeah. They executed their vision. Whether you agreed with it or not is a different story. But nonetheless, when you ask the question, what is it going to take? It's going to take us articulating a clear vision.
Yes.
And then having the fortitude to deliver on that vision.
Right. And
that vision has to be those creeks and streams are filled with salmon again.
Right.
See, a salmon economy is a healthy economy for all aspects of our province. It's a healthy economy for our forestry industry.
Yeah.
It's a healthy
because
economy.
The bears take the salmon back into the forest. It feeds the soil.
Well, yeah. If you're gonna strip the main nourishment out of our forests, you're going to have a sad.
But I'm just pausing on this for a minute because I only learned about 10 years ago when they first did the research. They were finding some aspect of the salmon, you know, up to 200 meters inshore.
And even further than that, but yeah.
Because the bears, the eagles were taking them in there and then rotting down into the soil.
That's right. And then actually the bears would then take it further and their feces would be dropped and it would go further than that.
Salmon feces. Right?
Further than that and further than that. And so it was nourishing our entire forest, like our forests.
Yes.
And so as well, you know, if you have good quality creeks and streams in our watersheds, it's going to serve community development well.
So this ties into forestry practices.
Yeah, and it ties into good community development, sustainable community development. It ties into sustainable agricultural practices.
Let me ask you a legislative question. Is the Ministry of Forests in the new government talking to the Ministry of Environment? Is it Environment that covers fisheries or federally, provincially?
That's a really good question. So we've asked some questions on this, and what we learned was that there are, and we got this letter that says there's 6 provincial ministries that have a, quote, lead role on salmon policy in the province.
Wow.
And so when we saw that, we said, well, there might be 6 ministries, 6 good ministers, you know, have good relationships with them, but there's nobody taking a lead role. If there's 6 taking a lead role, then nobody is.
One of them is not the senior one that does take the lead role?
If there is, I haven't yet, I've been working on this, I haven't yet to be able to determine it.
And it's been that case for the last 20 years then?
Well, it's been that way. I mean, I think agriculture manages the aquaculture industry.
Yes.
And with that is both finfish aquaculture, so the salmon farming industry, and as well it fits into that, whatever wild salmon fishery is left, right?
But the crossover with forestry to fisheries, it was obviously...
Well, the impacts are massive. If you're going to cut, if you're going to clear cut the creeks and streams that those fish return to, then you're going to fry them.
But the water's too hot.
Exactly. Yes. You'll fry them. And so there needs to be, from our perspective, from my perspective, there needs to be one central office that brings together all of the policy that advocates on behalf of BC's coast.
Right.
To me, my preference would be that we start to defend wild Pacific salmon like Alberta defends its oil. You know, and it's a more sustainable, renewable resource as well.
So where does the herring fishery fit into this? Because
it's the food, right?
So are the herring being protected sufficiently?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. I know less about the herring fishery, but I can tell you that, you know, I'm from the Saanich Inlet. That's where I grew up.
Yes. And
the herring that used to come in there, we used to lay out the cedar branches for the row. We haven't seen them in there for a long time. I think the story right across up and down the coast is that the herring fisheries, you know, there's every year, except for this year. In fact, DFO opens up a herring fishery, much to the chagrin of First Nations communities up and down the coast who are not fishing herring anymore because of the situation that they're in. You know, I think
and the First Nations would protect the herring, knowing that the herring is the primary food source for the salmon, right?
We haven't. I mean, our communities haven't fished sockeye for 4 or 5 years now because those salmon runs that you're talking about are so low. I mean, we carry a sadness around, and I actually think that the average British Columbian carries a sadness around about the state of our salmon fishery.
So when I look at the debate around the causes for the collapse, say, of the sockeye runs and some other runs, some people will say it's global warming and the water warming. Some people say it's the fish farms. Some people say it's the deforestation. Some people say it's the loss of herring. Some people say it's the commercial fisheries. Some people say it's the Alaskan fisheries. Do you have a sense of is there smoking gun is a funny metaphor to mix in with this, but what is the biggest cause of the collapse of the, it's a collapse, it's a massive collapse. What's the biggest cause of the collapse of the sockeye salmon
so
run?
we need to be desperate about this. We can't afford to bury this in rhetoric.
Yeah.
We need to be desperate about this. Government needs to be desperate about it, and every single one of those things that you said is part of the problem.
Yeah.
And what we've found, and what I've found so far as an MLA in this, for the last number of months in this province, is that there isn't any one central agency taking a lead role on making sure that our vision, our words, our rhetoric align with that vision, and that it is that wild salmon, the government continues to repeat, wild Pacific salmon are important, we want to return them. Well, then we've got to do that. So, and to do it, we have to be able to make policy that addresses all those areas that you talked about.
So in your ideal, if you are now suddenly magic blah, 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 you're minister of something important, what would you set up?
Well, I would set up a wild salmon secretariat or a commission with a commissioner.
Would it be under one of the ministries?
Well, it could be a minister. I mean, in the past in BC, we've had Ministry of Fisheries. And so we're in the process right now of developing just exactly what you're talking about. I'm not gonna get too much in the weeds on it. We're going to develop a framework, I think, and propose it to government.
So
but
you'd see a Ministry of Fisheries as the way to do it, with a minister,
or a secretariat that sits between a number of ministries, because clearly Forest Lands and Natural Resources, Ministry of the Environment, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Transportation, you know, they do fish ladders and culverts, and clearly all these ministries have some responsibility in this.
Yes.
What we need is a coordinating office.
What needs to happen with fish farming in BC?
It needs to go on land.
Right.
It needs to go on land. It needs to be exactly like many other countries are doing. I think British Columbians need to get very angry about the fact that what we've allowed is foreign multinational corporations to pollute in our waters for free.
Okay, because can you
ridiculous.
Spell out to the viewer the nature of that pollution? Because there's going to be viewers saying, well, what's wrong with fish farms? They're enclosed, they're separate, and it's good food, and it's good jobs. What kind of pollution are you talking about the fish farms?
We're talking about massive amounts of feces. We're talking about food that we have no idea what's in it, that they just basically spray around. We're talking about the processing plants pumping, people probably have seen the blood water videos, pumping disease-infested blood water, you know, constantly out into bays and inlets.
Are you up to speed on the new piscine virus?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following the work.
Alexander Morton's done a video about it, saying that there's 80% of the fish have got piscine virus onto the sockeye, and it inhibits their heart impulse, and then they haven't got enough strength to swim upstream to spawn.
That's right, and so the provincial government had some
retrovirus, PRV, that's its name.
Piscine reovirus.
Piscine reovirus.
And the other one is the heart skeletal, it's HSMI.
Yes, and then there's the sea lice problem as well.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, basically the problems are anytime you create feedlots, when you put 40,000 salmon into a room slightly bigger than this,
you got a sewage problem.
You're going to have a problem, and that's just clearly it's going to have a problem. And basically, from what I understand, is that there's questions about who it is that enforces, who regulates, who manages it. You know, I've basically got ministers and ministries going like this, and then saying, oh,
you
the feds.
1 week ago, Washington State said we're not going to renew any future fish farm licenses. The ones that are still there, we'll let them run out, but then no more fish farming in Washington State waters for the whole state.
So BC could do this. BC's got 17 or 18 fish farm licenses coming up on June the 20th.
Right.
They've started the negotiation with the companies. The companies have applied, from my understanding. The provincial government's in a nation-to-nation, government-to-government conversation with the First Nations in the Broughton Archipelago. Right. But it comes down to this. The Minister of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, Doug Donaldson, can create a policy that says we are moving away from aquaculture.
Yes.
We are doing exactly what, we take the same action that was taken with, we're not going to be renewing fish farm tenures on the ocean. We will allow them on land. And what that would do is it would require the corporations to then deal with their own waste.
Right. How many times has this been done in the past with fish farms on land?
So there's been a couple of at least one, Kutera, I think, which was a test, basically a pilot project. There are on-land fish farms around the world. Other countries are moving their fish farms out of open ocean onto land.
Trout have been farmed on land for thousands of years, right? Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest pollution, I missed the boat here when you asked me about pollution.
Yes.
The biggest pollutant is the fact that we're growing Atlantic salmon in the Pacific Ocean. You've got it's an alien invasive species.
Yes.
Why? You went through the beautiful 5 Pacific coastal salmon that are here.
Already
what
here.
the heck are we doing growing an invasive species in our ocean?
And when that net broke in Washington State off one of the islands.
350,000 of them.
And they were found out in Tofino and all up the coast.
Saanich Inlet they were found.
Yeah.
So, I think that it's been argued in the legislature, it gets argued all the time. Well, it's just too expensive. There's no business case for it to come on land. The reality is, as long as we're allowing these businesses to go in the ocean and pollute there and not have to deal with their pollution, of course it's going to be less expensive to do that kind of farming. But I think that, when it comes down to enterprise, these people shouldn't get a free ride.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be allowed to pollute. I come from small business. I come from business owners. I understand business. I'm not against it.
Yeah.
But what I am against is I'm against businesses polluting our environment for free, for no cost.
In the language of economics, it's called an externality. So someone else pays for the cost of cleaning up.
They need to internalize it.
Yes.
I think that's what they say. Andrew Weaver always says, we need to internalize our external.
Well, one more approach to that would be you put a tax on the fish farming equivalent to all the costs, but then you've got to put a dollar figure. How do you put a dollar figure on the loss of a fish farm from 40 million down to,
Look, all we have to say is we're not renewing licenses, but we will be happy to give you a license on land. That's all you have to say.
Yeah.
But what it takes is a government that has a vision and a commitment to execute that vision.
Yes.
We saw it with the Liberals in the early 2000s.
Right.
They took it in a direction that I don't particularly support, but they did it. And they showed the path as to how we can undo it.
So in your conversations so far, how is that vision going to be there? Do you think there is a willingness to make that vision?
Absolutely no issue. And I fully believe the ministers and the Premier when they say, when Premier Horgan says that he is a supporter and a strong supporter of wild salmon, I believe it. I know the man. He's a fisherman. Yes. He loves the fish. In fact, a few years ago, we ran into each other at an event late on a Tuesday evening or something like that, and it was around wild salmon.
Does the ledge serve wild salmon in the canteen?
Probably better.
Yeah, you
ran
into him at an event.
Jeff
anyway.
At an event. Jeff Meggs, who's his chief of staff, also, long history in fish. I believe these people when they say that they are very much in, but what is articulated must be acted on.
Yes.
And so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be putting forward some ideas on how to take this articulation of an idea, turn it into a vision, and then act on it.
Is any of that written into the confidence and supply agreement?
No.
No.
Confidence and supply agreement was an agreement that allowed us to form government.
Yeah.
We're working on those policy pieces, but no, salmon wasn't. Salmon didn't play a major role in their platform. In our platform, it doesn't play a major role in the budget, unfortunately. And
so, whether First Nations, do First Nations in Broughton Inlet operate their own fish farms?
No.
It's all.
Yeah, it's and they've been in opposition to it for 30 years.
Okay.
I think that the path forward here is pretty clear. I think that when we look at investing in renewing our creeks and streams, that's just a good investment.
Yeah.
In investing in genome mapping of the genetics of fish. Each one of these fish that goes back to a creek and a stream. Yeah. We need to, we've got the technology now to understand who they are, what they look like, what their genetic makeup looks like. And we need to start, just like we need to preserve indigenous languages, we need to start to understand and preserve that genetic material, because actually, as those runs get less and less and less, they need hundreds of fish in order to preserve that genetic footprint. So we should start should start understanding what makes that salmon go there and not go there.
Have you come across the term shifting baseline syndrome? It's a term used in ecology when a generation that grows up thinking it normal to have hardly any wild salmon thinks that's normal and have no idea that there used to be so many in the past.
Right.
And you normalize degradation and loss. And so the need to restore cultural memory and make it clear that there were 40 million salmon coming in every year to the sockeye runs, and now it's like 2 million, 5 million, less than a million, and how much we've lost instead of just normalizing it.
Well, I want to push back a little bit because I don't know that it was every year. And there's stories, the Saanich people have stories of when the salmon were very, very low.
Yeah.
And the stories that I've heard about this were that people felt impoverished, they were weak, they felt they were hungry.
Okay, so yeah.
And they talk about the relationship with others, then fish for other species and stuff. The reason why I bring that up is because I don't want this to be a story, a sad story.
Okay.
I want this to be a story of success.
Right.
I want this to be a story of celebration.
Right.
I want us to look at the fish that we've got there and say, we're going to help you. We're going to be your relatives once again, and we're going to get you back to that. Knowing that fish stocks have declined in the past, whether it be because of forest fires or because of disease or because of whatever reason. We know that the stories are in the past that they have declined, almost to the point of not being there, not being able to be found. It's with that knowledge that in the 1800s there were 40 million of them, which means that even in years of decline, these are resilient. They are our resilient relatives,
right, yeah.
And they will come back. And I think that it's with that is what inspires me to continue to work in the legislature, to continue to work with my colleagues, the Premier, his Chief of Staff, the ministers, my colleagues in the legislature, to say, this is not a story, a sad story of what we have lost. This is an exciting story about what we are about to gain. This amazing economy, a truly renewable natural resource. It comes back every 4 years, and all we got to do is treat it with respect.
Every 4 years, legislators every 5 years, every 4 years.
5 years, well.
So it's the same sort of thing. Well, look, our time's run out, believe it or not. So look,
not surprising, passion here.
Thank you for your leadership in the Green Party and in the legislature and on salmon and on so many other issues. It's just...
Well, thank you for having me.
We need people to have the confidence to stand up and say, I can be a city councillor, I can be an MLA, I can go on and be a premier. Who knows?
To that point, there's a local government election coming up in October.
November.
Check it out, because you know what? It's fun.
So let me say this. So you've been watching, my name's Guy Dauncey, you've been watching the show Change the World with my guest Adam Olsen. There is an election coming up in November. If you get an inkling to think, how can I make a difference? Talk to your friends, think about running for election in October. And I might really regret saying this, but call me and let's have a conversation about it. I'd be happy to tell you what my experience has been. We'll have your website up on the screen. So anyway, one of my contributions is this book called Journey to the Future, A Better World is Possible, set in Vancouver in the year 2032, where, among other things, there has been so much herring restoration that the humpback whales have come back into English Bay. If you enjoy the kind of show like this, tune in next week and we'll have more scintillating discussions. Thanks for watching.